Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amherst Williams, the Executive Director of the Connecticut League of Museums, and I want to welcome you to today's program on engaging your elected leaders during AAM's Invite Congress 2024. We have brought together a group of folks at the national and regional and state levels to talk with us a little bit about how to engage with your elected representatives at all of these different levels during the AAM initiative Invite Congress. And so we're really fortunate to have with us today Barry Szczesny, who is the Director of Government Relations and Public Policy at the American Alliance of Museums. Thank you so much for joining us, Barry. We also have with us at the regional level from the New England Museum Association, Executive Director Kayla Coleman, who just got off a plane, and Jen Wilson, whose title is Director of Programming and Advocacy. And at the state level from Connecticut Humanities, we're joined by Jason Mancini, the Executive Director of Connecticut Humanities, although I also see some other folks from CTH here as well. Including Cindy Tolosa, Becky Vitkowska, Dana. Oh, wow. And we've got Heather from NEMA as well. So we've got a great group of folks from all of these different organizations here today to engage with all of us and give us some tips and tricks to help us understand how to use the Invite Congress initiative to really begin engaging with our elected leadership as we look forward to exciting things like an election and a legislative session here in Connecticut in 2025. So we're going to start off at the national level. I'm going to hand things over to Barry, who's going to tell us a little bit about the Invite Congress initiative, as well as some of the resources that the American Alliance of Museums has for us. Barry, take it away.
Thank you very much, Amherst. And thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. So, again, Barry Szczesny, Director of Government Relations Public Policy, the American Alliance of Museums, your lobbyist in Washington, or lobbyist for museums in Washington. Ember Farber, our longtime Director of Advocacy, as many of you know, moved on earlier this year to other endeavors. But just some news: we expect to have a new Director of Advocacy on board very soon. So I'm happy to share some brief information about Invite Congress and provide you some links to resources and things like that. So I'll dive in right now. So inviting local, state, and federal elected officials and their staff members into your museum is a powerful way to show them the unique work that museums do, from world-class exhibitions to working with local students and community members on critical life skills. As the world embraces new realities and ways of doing business, federal, state, and local legislators are eager to connect with their constituents and communities they represent across all available platforms and venues. But nothing beats the in-person visit, and no one can tell your museum story and contributions to your community better than you can. So since 2012, the national field-wide hashtag Invite Congress effort has encouraged and empowered museums of all types and sizes to invite their federal, state, and local legislators and stakeholders into the museum for a firsthand look at the powerful work of museums and museum professionals. Elected officials are engaging in-person and virtual visits and meetings with constituents, and AAM encourages museums to take advantage of impactful opportunities to connect with legislators. As Congress actively considers funding and other issues affecting museums, it is critical that museum advocates continue to make the case for federal, state, and local support for museums to legislators. And it's a critical time, August recess for Congress, to engage with elected officials and stakeholders that represent your museum. Our materials make it easy for museums of all types and sizes to participate and connect with your elected officials this summer and throughout the year. So use the Alliance's step-by-step how-to guide to get started today, and take a selfie with your senators or representatives when they come visit your museum. And don't forget to use the hashtag Invite Congress with your posts on social media. So just to go over some brief resources, I'll put a link in the chat to our Invite Congress
I've actually just done that, Barry,
You
so people have that on hand.
way ahead of me. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So you'll find several things there, and I'm not going to go through the whole site, but at this link you'll find learn about 6 reasons to invite Congress to visit your museums, which is a short video. Make your plans with our full how-to guide, which includes these and other resources to help you finding your legislators and their offices, local contact information, sending an invitation to your legislators' offices using our letter email template, and getting step-by-step guidance for planning and preparing for your visit, including key asks for federal legislators. And then all at this link, so you don't have to write any of this down, just a brief overview of AAM's federal legislative priorities this year's funding for the Office of Museum Services at the Institute of Museum and Library Services, funding for the NEA and NEH, asking your senators and representatives to co-sponsor the Charitable Act to allow taxpayers to deduct charitable contributions regardless of whether they itemize, and lifting the unreasonable and unfair ban that makes museums ineligible for House Community Project funding, also known as earmarks. And the website, the link that Amber's provided, also includes links to template letters that you can send right away with information about the asks, and those template letters can also be repurposed and just used for your talking points if you're talking to your legislators, your federal legislators. And if you want a more comprehensive guidance and you want to dig deeper, we have a toolkit, Speaking Up Museum Advocacy and Action, and I can put that, unless Amherst already did put that link in, I could put that link in the chat. Where, let's see,
I think I found it, Barry. Speak Up for Museums, the AAM Guide to Advocacy.
I don't think that's it. Hold on, I got it.
I'll let you put it in.
For some reason, I don't see the chat. Anyway, I'll figure that out in a minute. Whiteboards, summary. Anyway, we'll figure that out in a minute. And just one final note, I just want to remark that Connecticut has an all-star delegation when it comes to support for programs and agencies that benefit museums. All of them signed on our IMLS funding support letters, both on the Senate side and on the House side. Senators Blumenthal, Murphy, Representatives Courtney, Hayes, Himes, and Larson, and I'm sure you all know, Ranking Member DeLauro of the House Appropriations Committee is just a true champion. And as she likes to say, the successes we get are not done by alchemy. They are done because of the hard work that all of you do. And even with this support, you might say, well, do we really need to engage when we know all these folks are on our site? Well, it's very important to thank them, thank members when they do the things that you're asking them to do. And things during the relief funding, as you all know, during the COVID crisis, PPP, shuttered venue operators grants, those things weren't a given. Those things had to be fought for, and the statewide funding you got, the Connecticut got through ARPA for free permissions at museums. You know that well. So again, important to thank your legislators who who are there helping you achieve your missions. And with that, I'll just say good luck and thank you for your advocacy. And I'll try to figure out where the chat is. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Barry. We can also, if you can't find it during this meeting, you can look it up and email it to us, and we can send it out as a follow-up resource to folks who attended the program. Thank you so much. I think we had Jason next up in our lineup to talk about kind of some of the issues and updates at advocacy at the state level. So I'm going to hand things over to Jason if he's ready.
Found
Thanks,
it, posted it.
Thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Amherst, and thanks, Barry. You left off where I was hoping to begin with our congressional delegation. The 7 members of our delegation have all been fantastic supporters of our work. We have a direct interaction with all of them in our advocacy every year in Washington. So please know for everybody on this call that Connecticut Humanities staff and I, as well as folks like Amherst and others, make our annual migration to Washington, D.C. in late February, early March for advocacy, and especially to thank our congressional delegation for their ongoing support. Every time I get a letter of concern or a request for funding, I go straight to their staff for those requests, and they more than happily sign it or co-sign it, I should say. So we're incredibly grateful. So please know that we have that direct engagement. But I think where Barry also left off was encouraging all of us to thank them and to invite them and thank them for their support. And I think as I talk a little bit about engaging our local elected leaders, it's important to bring these people together at our sites as well. And it's a reason that they want to connect with one another so they can hear each other's stories and share some lessons learned, some stories that they can bring to other constituents and their peers. So many of us in Connecticut, there are different kinds of cultural organizations and specifically in the museum environment, from very small to very large. And we all have different levels of comfort in working with our legislators and our elected leaders. I think the most important thing that I'd like to say in terms of demystifying what that looks like is they're our neighbors. They have, on some fundamental level, a responsibility to us. So it's an opportunity, whether it's a congressional member or a mayor or a state senator or state representative that represents us, to build a relationship and get them to know you and your organization. So it's important, just some very elemental relationship things that you would do with a new neighbor. Invite them over, share a story with them, invite them to an event or a program. These basic invitations or opportunities to engage are the foundations of a relationship. And those are really important. In so doing, I think also we need to be conscious of how we shape a narrative. For somebody who doesn't know you, who doesn't know your organization, one of the things that I've been encouraging a lot of league members and others across the state is to shape a story. What's your story? Why do you matter to your constituents, to the people you serve? And making sense of that on an organizational level. I think many of us grapple with that. I've been visiting a lot of communities across Connecticut with our staff. Some are really struggling to shape a narrative. Some have a narrative really locked down and want to tell it. And I think this is an opportunity where Connecticut Humanities and the League and NEMA can all help us grapple with that, shaping our individual and collective narrative, whether it's our organization or our community. Those are things that we're here to support and guide all of you with. And just to build out of that a little bit more, in the work that we've been doing with the Connecticut legislative body, and especially with the governor's office more recently, we're trying to speak more and more their language and understand how they make their decisions. And what I've begun to recognize is that a lot of decisions are made around economic, educational, and social impacts. And I think the more that we can define what those are for our particular organizations and what they mean to our communities, the more skilled we can become in telling our stories and advocating for increased support. So I think as we talk about economic impact, there are new resources that are available to all of you. We hope to do some additional sharing of content. And I'm specifically referencing Arts and Economic Prosperity 6, which is a report released last fall, and something that was presented up in the Legislative Office Building this spring. And this really allows us to think on an individual and community level, but also statewide level, about the economic impact our organizations have in terms of how people spend their money when they attend your organization, and all of the dividends that pays in other ways, from restaurant spends to hotel stays to parking fees and so on. Every time somebody comes to your organization or your community, there's additional dollars involved. And what we try to do is communicate the broader impact that will resonate when additional investments are made. The educational impacts that we have, I think sometimes we get caught in telling our own story and thinking about our audience in a particular way. There are other ways that we're looking to expand our audiences and your connectivity to those audiences through educational frameworks and curriculum. So thinking about the new social studies frameworks that were adopted this year, and how do our educational programs that are, whether it's a local historical society or an art museum or the science center, what does that look like in terms of communicating the content and translating it to provide a roadmap for educators and for the students that they're trying to engage? I think we all have part of that educational piece. And if we can think of ourselves as part of that ecosystem of knowledge, we can provide wraparound support that educators don't typically think of themselves as part of or wanting to engage. And then finally, the social impacts. What makes Connecticut an exceptional place to live, work, and play? What draws people to our communities are the cultural resources. We are, as many of you know, an incredibly culturally dense state, but we can often act in incredible silos. And I think the more we can connect our organizations, the more we can encourage people to share our connected stories, as well as venturing to other towns, we're gonna be able to convey why that matters in terms of our not just social health, but our civic health. What makes us sort of volunteer? How do we do that in our communities? How do we engage and support our community anchors through our museums? The last thing I want to say about that, which goes back to the economic impact that I want to really encourage thinking around, that comes out of AEP 6, the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study, is beginning to think about our organizations as businesses and how we communicate that. So really beginning to understand the sort of economic engine that each of our organizations is, and communicating that to our legislators so that they see us as investments and not liabilities. I think that's one of the clear things that has been important in how we talk about ourselves. Many of you know the next legislative, well, we have elections coming up this fall in Connecticut, and the next legislative cycle will begin in January. And Connecticut Humanities and partners are beginning to craft both a gubernatorial ask as well as a legislative ask, and the sort of key pieces of that. And while we don't have anything in place right now, we're working closely with our partners in the arts and tourism, and through that as well, Lodging Association and the Restaurant Association, So we're building a coalition of people who are thinking about how our constituencies intersect and support one another. And I would encourage you to just stay tuned, as we will have further direction and messaging for all of you in terms of how we will communicate that to the legislature, and how we'll ask you and prepare you to share this sort of economic, educational, and social information and impacts with your elected representatives. And I will say that we do have a very supportive elected body, but there are multiple and competing interests in our sectors. You know, a lot of energy and interest is put into housing, healthcare, and higher ed. So we need to be vocal about our needs as well. And the more we can communicate that impact, the more success we'll have. So I'll leave my part there and hand it off to Jen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Right.
Take it away, Jen.
Thank you, Amaris. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Amaris, and Barry and Jason for setting that up. So I know for myself, sometimes I just want a list of like, how do I do this? How do I start to tackle advocating for my organization, for myself? So I'm going to build upon the foundation of that Barry and Jason have put forth, and I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to share what NEMA has on our website as really simple, basic tools, and then we'll do kind of an overview also of conference as well, and some ways that NEMA as an organization is trying to holistically support the museum field in New England. So just give me 1 sec. It's always the fun finding all the buttons. All right, and can I get a thumbs up that you see that? Great, thank you so much. All right, so this is the NEMA homepage. It's nemanet.org. Amaris did a fantastic job of dropping links in earlier. So right at the end of our bar at the top is advocacy, and this sends you to all of our resources that are available for everybody in the region. This spring, right before Kayla and I headed down to DC with Amaris and Jason as well, we did a number of listening sessions, and we'll probably reprise that in the winter, early spring, somewhere in there. And it's an opportunity for NEMA to listen and hear what's happening across the field and understand holistically what are some of the things that we're seeing from state to state, and are there reoccurring themes that we're seeing in Connecticut and that we're also seeing in Maine, and how do we put people in conversation? But then kind of the things that I really want to highlight and point to you, 2 things in particular: tips and tools for talking to your legislator. It is literally a numbered list, step by step, of how do you do it, right? It can sound really daunting to say, like, I'm just going to send an email to my senator. If you haven't done that before, you can have that moment of like, how do I start? As Jason and Barry had said earlier, it's about relationship building. It's about doing a little bit of research, understanding who you're asking and for what, and what is the reciprocity of this relationship? What's in it for you, and what isn't it for them? And this guide takes you through step by step of how do you do this. So who are you contacting, knowing the story, building that out. We have a toolkit here to help you make that impact statement. So that way you have your kind of your quick elevator pitch. You're not in this moment of like, ooh, what do I say to this person? You can hone it down to what's really important. As Jason was just saying, understanding how do you frame your story and your narrative to the person you're talking to. If you're talking to somebody that's really into small business and economics, then you want to talk about museums and your site as a small business and organization, and what does it bring to the community. The person in front of you may not be as interested in, I don't know, historic preservation. That may not be their avenue, but you can always find a frame in which you can tell a story for the person you're talking to. Make an appointment. Also invite people to your site. The amazing opportunity for museums is that you have physical locations for people to visit. And especially this year, I'm going to say this is going to scare some people. We're 83 days out from the election. This is a perfect opportunity to have people to your site for events, for photo ops. Think about something that's upcoming on your end that would make a really huge impact to have one of your legislators there. But also, what's a great opportunity for them to be like surrounded by members of the community. And as always, do the follow-up. Thank yous are so important. I think that we have often, we've gotten letters from donors, from school groups, a visitor who you answered the question for. You get that follow-up email or that letter and it makes your day. Same thing on the other side. So this is all about relationship building. So this is a step-by-step guide of how to start that process of connecting with government officials, knowing who to contact. A couple of other things I would say while talking about this really quickly. Give people notice. I reached out to, I'm in Rhode Island. I reached out to our Secretary of State's office, and I reached out, I think in July for an event in November, and they're like, it's too early, but we'll add you to our tracking list. So they knew well in advance that our event was happening, and they're like, we can't make a decision now, but we're going to add this so we have some concept of like, this is coming. So if you get the response like it's too early, just say like, can you just keep it like, put it on your tracking list, just make sure that like, you know, you do some follow-up there. Also add people to add your legislators, add the people who organize their office, add them to your newsletters and follow theirs. And last but not least on this page, vote. It's very important. I know that is a very common like, oh yeah, you should vote. I say that because I was at a workshop recently, and it was a like behind the scenes tips and tricks, what the office staffers want you to know about how to be heard. The first thing that came up was when a request comes through from somebody, they do a background check of just like, quick, does this person vote? Are they registered to vote? And if they do vote, then it's like, oh, great, awesome. We'll, you know, we'll bump this up. We'll make sure that we really pay attention to it. The person hasn't voted, they're not, you know, they're not doing their civic duty. It's like, we'll take it kind of seriously, but it maybe not, won't have immediate attention. So I'm just gonna throw that out there too. And then the other thing that I want to share from this, oops, and of course my little taskbar is right in the way. So back on this advocacy page, talking about different types of impact, as Jason had discussed earlier, we have a topical resource library, and this breaks down a number of resources, both at things that are important for people to advocate for themselves. So if it's about gender equity and wage equity, or if it's about the 250th that's coming up. So these are additional resources. You just click on it and it'll break down a number of different links for you to visit. So if you're trying to contextualize what your organization is doing, we do have a number of other resources for you to look at as well. You can always also reach out to Nima. Both Kayla and I love talking about advocacy. And it's something that we are always thinking about holistically across the field, both thinking about holistically from state to state and the trends that we see. And then I'll do my plug as always for our annual conference. So I'll click over to that page really quickly. So everybody knows at this point that the presidential election, the next election is on November 5th, Tuesday, November 5th. We have our upcoming NEMA conference, so 4 museums across the region on the 6th, 7th, and 8th. So yes, conference does start the day after the election. And the reason I bring it up is that there are a number of sessions that are related to topics that we've been talking about. So we have, this is our theme for the year, We the Museum Toward a More Perfect Vision of Our Changing World. We've had a number of session proposals and accepted sessions this year that are pointed towards America 250th, including a think tank. So as organizations are thinking about how to honor and celebrate and remember the 250th, there are opportunities to have conversations with your peers in Connecticut, but also across the field to get ideas of what other people are talking about. If you're also struggling, New England really isn't, but in case you are, there are opportunities to have sounding boards. And then specifically, we have a couple of great civics and advocacy sessions. One of them is an Advocacy 101, and it's looking at the core tenets of what advocacy is. And that's from like self-advocacy of how do you go to your boss and ask for a raise. Those same core tenets can be used for advocating for your department, your organization, for your part of the museum field, or as one of our board members will talk about, how to advocate at a federal level or a regional level as well. And then the other one, and this is a very Connecticut heavy presentation, which I love, we have museum civics and civic education in your space and why it matters. So how museums are picking up civic education, and we'll have people from Connecticut Council for Social Studies, Mystic Seaport, Connecticut Democracy Center, and the Connecticut Museum for Culture and History. So Connecticut's really coming in strong and talking about civics education in the museum field at this year's conference too. So that's all my like bits and plugs. I'm gonna, if Caleb would like, let me stop sharing the screen. If Caleb would like to jump in, no pressure, Caleb, but if you want to jump in. Oh,
She
did
had
she?
to
Okay.
depart, so
Well,
it's all you.
oh, she's busy. Okay, that's fine. So that's my quick spiel. I was hoping to keep that to about 5 to 7 minutes to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm good.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm very excited to know that there's going to be so much advocacy and civics related stuff at the conference in Newport. So I'm hoping we'll see a lot of you folks there. And because we're talking about advocacy resources and we have Barry and the AAM here, I also want to put in a plug for Museums Advocacy Day, which AAM organizes. And if you want to do advocacy, get incredible training from a swath of professionals and people in DC who know exactly what they're doing and can brief you on all of the issues, and then spend the following day putting all of that into practice, you should attend Museums Advocacy Day. It is, I had been virtually for several times after I started this job, you know, during the pandemic, and I went for the first time in person last year. It's amazing. And will make you feel more confident about everything you do in advocacy at whatever level it is. Because you have to learn and then put things into practice with your federal elected representatives like the following day. So it's intense, but incredibly, incredibly helpful and will help you feel way more confident than you ever thought you could about, yes, I can do this. So I'm just going to put a link in the chat to that. It's usually at the end of February, beginning of March.
Yep. And this year it'll be the 24th and 25th of February. And thank you so much for that, Amaris. I really appreciate that.
Emily and I were there last year and just had an incredible experience. So, you know, while there are folks from Connecticut who go from statewide organizations, we always find that the best stories really come from individual museums. So if you feel that your cultural organization are in a position where you can go to DC and participate in that as a part of Connecticut's, you know, sort of delegation to Museums Advocacy Day, I highly recommend it. So with all of that said, I'd love to open things up to some more general Q&A. We've covered a lot of ground and talked about things at a lot of different levels. So I want to invite you to, you know, turn on your video, raise your hand, pop something in the chat. There was a question from Marianne about the link to letter templates. Do you want to, I think we have letter templates from a number of different organizations. So I don't know if this was for Barry or for other groups, Marianne, but
well, for the link that you put in, Amaris, if you go to that site, and then there's I think under the how-to instructions, and you go down to like number 5, there's like, you know, it talks about what the asks are this year, and it will within that there will be hyperlinks. There will be links to the template letters. So if it says the Institute of Museum and Library Services and it's linked, when you go to that link, you will that'll pull up the template letter. Those several ask issues that I discussed in my presentation.
Yeah, so Marianne, if you go to the Invite Congress page, there's a lot of links out from there to a number of different resources, and you should be able to find them there. I popped a few other links in the chat. You know, Connecticut Humanities has resources on advocacy, including things like a sample letter of appreciation to a lawmaker or the governor, a sample press release, and other things. These have been designed for grantees, but I think they're really useful for everybody. And the Connecticut Arts Alliance also has a bunch of advocacy resources that relate to the cultural sector. So I just wanted to put a plug in for the work that they've been doing as well. There are a lot of resources out there. NEMA's stuff on doing impact statements, I think, is a really great way to connect some of NEMA's regional resources with some of the stuff that Jason was talking about in terms of what we're seeing the governor and legislators really want to see: the economic impact, the educational impact, the social impact. And so I would encourage you to go to NEMA's page as well for more information and some examples. I know that Meg Winnicates had, Jen's predecessor, had put together a bunch of kind of like samples that we had utilized in the run up to Museums Advocacy Day in previous years. Okay, so Erin,
I have a question.
oh, Anne, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, in my case, my nonprofit is doing an oral history project, and we do not have an on-site museum, but we have a growing collection of these oral histories. And I just wondered how to orient the discussion with one of these representatives, what kind of vocabulary to use. I mean, some things are obvious, but at the same time, I just wondered how it fits into this sort of advocacy that you're talking about. I really like any suggestions you might have.
Yeah.
I mean, what we're doing
Yeah.
is like people are telling their stories about how they came here as refugees and what they've contributed. So it's really, a nation building kind of story. I
Yeah.
just wonder how you would suggest approaching the state representatives with something like that, the way you're talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does
I
anyone
could
want to
weigh in a
jump in
little
on
bit
that?
on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
So this is something we've been navigating in the last couple of years. There's some projects that Connecticut Humanities has been supporting, and as well as partners. The EPIC, Engaged Community Oral and Community History Project. I probably screwed up the acronym. Anyway, Fiona Vernal at University of Connecticut has been coordinating a broad coalition of oral historians indexing oral histories across the state. And the question has come up around advocacy for oral history. And I don't know, this is one of the challenges. I think it's good to let your legislators know these kinds of things are happening. But I think as part of a broader cultural infrastructure argument we need to be making. And so funding for museums broadly, I think, supports oral histories and other types of initiatives like that. But I think on the scale of legislative advocacy, I think it's embedded within the broader cultural initiatives. So if you're working, Anne, with a museum or other cultural organization, it might be worth sort of sharing those stories with your legislators in terms of how your oral history project is impacting museum exhibits or be informing educational programming. If you can connect those dots for educators, I think those are the kinds of outcomes that they're going to want to see.
Yeah, and if I can chime in too, I don't know, do you have the oral histories accessible somewhere on a website? How are you collecting them? Because I think that may also influence how you would want to kind of do the approach and tell the story about what you're doing. Is your organization a museum, or is it like a refugee service organization?
It's a 501c3 nonprofit it was founded for educational media.
Yeah, okay.
And that's what this is. And I've edited some of them, and they're on Connecticut Public Access TV in certain towns. And we have another bunch we're about ready to launch to put up on those stations. Yeah. But that's part of the public programming. But we have other plans. We'd like to do other things with them. With maybe a print publication, a documentary film. Those are coming up, but we're still collecting them, and you can't imagine just how time consuming it all is. Finding the people, going to festivals and looking for people and reaching out to organizations that deal with them. Some of them came a long time ago. Some of them are very current. And some of them are afraid to talk about their experience for one political reason or another. And, I have them all sign releases, and a lot of time goes into just getting one interview. And sometimes they talk for 5 hours
Yep.
And then I had to do something with all that material and edit it down. And I
Yeah.
talked to the fellows at the Connecticut Digital Archive at UConn, and it looks like it's something that we could eventually house there.
Yeah.
But it's a really blown away by what these people went through and how how much work they've put into managing their life and contributing to society once they got here. It's been amazing, really. Every single person. So
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, as someone who's been involved in oral history projects in the past, like I am well aware of all of the front end and back end work that goes in to support those. And I'm sure this is shared by anyone who's done oral history work in this sphere as well. I mean, to me, what this really speaks to is some of the interconnectedness of, I mean, I think Jason was talking about earlier about connecting the kind of cultural story. You think of an oral history project as like something that a collecting institution does, a museum or a library. And, there's a collection, but, I think that the stories that you're telling also talk about the ways in which those collecting activities, which we think of as the sphere of cultural organizations and collecting institutions and repositories, are really a way of engaging communities and helping them understand their stories. So I think this goes back to one of the things that Jason was talking about like, how do we shape that narrative? And your example really connects so many things around community formation, what it means to be an American. You could connect it to 250th stuff to someone who's interested in 250th. You can connect it to a lot of different things. And you can imagine, I know that you had kind of introduced this question around, we don't really have a site to invite people to. So how do we use our story to, to engage with a legislator? You can imagine, an event or being at an event where you're collecting some of these stories, inviting a legislator to come and engage with both you and the people that you're interviewing in that way to connect some of these things. So I think there are a lot of ways that you could think about that.
I do. May I ask? Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, well, I'm just so I'm looking at this holistically, and I'm not Connecticut based, I'm Rhode Island based. And it may be interesting for you to reach out to an organization in Rhode Island called Rhode Island Latino Arts. And it's run by a woman named Marta Martinez, and she has been collecting oral histories from the Latinx community for 30 to 40 years, actually. And she started this as a project in college and does not collect necessarily from a museum standpoint, but as a cultural organization and as a community building aspect. So, and it's been really fascinating to see how that's evolved over time and how she segued that work. And her work has actually been evolved into a book. Her life story was made into a play recently. So I think there's some different interesting avenues of how to take those oral histories. And I'll drop a link for this in the chat. There's some ways for oral histories to not exist necessarily in museums, but as cultural organizations, and what is kind of that stewardship and that community building that can be utilized. And Marta is a fantastic resource. So I'd highly recommend it. And that's that may be another way to see like what's happening in the region too. So I'll drop that for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. May I ask one follow-up question? Because we're not an on-site place, and we're not actually employed by an employer, we are putting our own structure into this nonprofit, and it would be nice to have it set up as kind of running a business and being able to pay people for their time. And it's kind of daunting to have to put the time into doing that while you're putting the time into doing your oral histories. And I just wondered if you had any suggestions on foundations that might be interested in doing some funding for time involved in this kind of oral history collection. It would be very helpful to be paid for our time to do this.
Sounds like a money question. I'm going to send it to the one organization here that actually gives out money, and that's Connecticut Humanities.
Yeah, I believe we have Becky Vikauskis
Oh yeah,
on
Becky's
our
here.
call,
Mhm.
grants team. So if Becky can drop a link in the chat to our funding lines.
I would also say, Anne, you should definitely be in touch with Fiona Vernal at UConn, because the project that they have, has their Connecticut Humanities has worked with that group to fund access to a project management and oral history recording system that might be able to save you some of the labor time, which would allow you to, and made it free for organizations in Connecticut to utilize that for managing the work of doing the oral histories and transcription and all of that. That may bring some of that labor down so that you might be able to devote some of your existing resources to other things like employing people and paying people for their time, which is obviously a very good thing to do. Yeah. Erin had popped a question in the chat earlier. And Erin, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and say a little bit more about this. But sort of he had a question for Barry, just kind of interested in your thoughts about the Project 2025 effort. Erin is involved with historic preservation work in Connecticut, and certainly that's something that looks like it's kind of taken a hit in the Project 2025 vision of things. How is AAM engaging with this, if at all?
Yeah, I think, it's become, I don't know if you want to get, well, first, let me back up. So, museums are nonpartisan, or certainly strive to be. And I think to the extent you put Project 2025 forward as something either for or against, that immediately has implications for how people are going to react. So I think what you should do, if you're not already doing it, is center your priorities and the things you care about most. And I wouldn't, as something to emphasize, you can also look back at, things, and this is what we're looking at right now. You can look back at, for example, the budgets that Trump submitted when he was president, and for 4 years straight, he zeroed out funding for the federal cultural agencies. And so you can start alerting, you can start voicing concerns to your elected officials about and gearing up to, if you have to fight those battles. And I think you could say things like, this was like the policy beforehand. I'm sure, I'm not sure. You look at what was done under the Trump administration, and also that's how you can kind of, I think, work in 2025 and say, even, looking forward, although it's, been controversial, 2025 does contain some things that would be harmful to our priorities as well. So maybe it's a long-winded way of saying, maybe not put that up front, but you can work it in as, there's nothing museum specific, but certainly there's unhelpful things in there as well. But we're kind of like just sticking to the priorities we have. I hope that helps. And please, if anybody else, feel free to chime in if I left anything out.
That help, Erin?
Yeah, I'll just add very quickly, from the perspective of Connecticut Humanities as the nonpartisan affiliate for the National Endowment for the Humanities. I mean, we do have to broadly stay out of those partisan politics and advocate for museum. I think, broadly speaking, maintaining museums as trusted public spaces. is our key priority.
Thanks, folks. Anybody else have some thanks? And we got the thumbs up from Aaron. So thank you, Barry and Jason, for those insights and perspectives. Does anyone else have any questions? We have kind of this all-star group of folks here from all different levels. So now's the chance. Well, I do want to say a couple of things before we go. Connecticut Humanities and the League are looking forward to presenting some additional advocacy programming later in the year, throughout the fall and into the winter as we start to gear up for the legislative session here in Connecticut. So there will be, you can look to your email for more information as we begin to schedule out some of those programs and webinars, equipping you with ideas, giving you some of the resources that you need, and helping us understand better as a sector what the ask is going to look like this year, so that when it's time to mobilize, then we are ready to do that. And we can really lay the foundations for that. Cindy, I know you had sent me an email about this. Is there anything more that you'd like to share about that effort, or is that a good enough overview for now?
I think that's great for now, and we should be sending out more information before the end of the month at the latest.
Great, excellent. Well, we're looking forward to being able to work with Connecticut Humanities and other partners to present those to all of you. I would like to thank you all for being here today and for participating in this conversation. I want to send out a special thanks to Barry and Jen and Jason for taking the time to lay out their resources for us and share their perspectives and give us their expertise as we all approach this work. So thank you all so much for being here. And before we go,
Thank you.
I also want to put in a plug. We've got some in-person programs coming up from the League at the end of this month and at the end of September. Some really wonderful interpretive impact story workshops that we're collaborating with Kristen Robinson as certified interpretive trainer to put on. The first one will be in less than 2 weeks on August 23rd at the Norwalk Aquarium. And the one in September will be in Hartford, and wait, where is that one happening? Is that happening at Twain, Emily? I'm totally forgetting.
Yes, that
now.
one is
Yeah,
that one
okay.
is happening at Mark Twain House on
the Mark
September
Twain House.
23rd. Yes.
So this is a great opportunity. It's not discipline specific. It's just really around approaching storytelling and interpretation. I know that folks have missed in-person skill building workshops. So we can send along more information. You can go to ctleague.org for more information about those events. Thank you so much for being here today. And you'll get a follow-up email with the resources in the chat. Thanks again, Barry, Jen, and Jason. And thank you so much, Emily, for making everything work smoothly behind the scenes today. Thanks for being here. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.